of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. Now, the French election. Macron has been re-elected to his second term, hasn't he, as French president? Let's be honest though, many people voted for him, not because they wanted him, but because they didn't want the alternative. So what's going to happen next then? How is Macron going to unite this very divided country? And more importantly, what does all this mean for Anglo-French relations? And bringing it back to politics here, did you catch the goings-on at the weekend? It made me laugh, so it did. The Angela Rayner Basic Instinct thing. How weird was that? Really? Do you think Angela Rayner was... Well, it's tea time, so I'll leave it to your imagination what the suggestions were that she was doing with her legs. It's all very peculiar, and by the way, if you want to accuse somebody of doing something, why do you do it anonymously? I have zero respect for anonymous sources. Make your claims by all means, but have the kahunas to put your own name to it. And get this, Google is launching an inclusive language tool. Do you really need your search engine to tell you how to speak and what words to use? I don't. And Michael Gove is considering opening a colliery in Cumbria to mine coal for the steel industry. What do you think to that? Because we cannot move right now, can we, when it comes to net zero? It's all about the good stuff, and coal isn't that. So do you think that is the right move by Goal? By Goal? It's an own goal by Michael Gove, some would say. And energy suppliers, do you think they are guilty of bad practice at the moment when it comes to things like overly raising their charges and bad customer service? Well, Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, he thinks so, and he wants Ofgem to investigate. Tell you what, though, I have a sneaky suspicion that it's not just the energy companies that are taking the Michael at the moment when it comes to inflating prices. We'll have all of that to come and more, but first, the latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. I'm Polly Middlehurst. The UK's Defence Secretary says around 15,000 Russian troops have so far been killed since President Putin first ordered the invasion of Ukraine. Ben Wallace made the announcement as he confirmed Britain will be sending more military hardware to the war-torn country. He says supplying more equipment and ammunition to Ukraine is the most efficient way to help push back Russian troops.
Russia has so far failed in nearly every one of its objectives. In recognition of this failure, the Russian High Command has regrouped, reinforced and changed focus. To date, we have provided more than 5,000 anti-tank missiles, 5 air defence systems with more than 100 missiles, 1,360 anti-structural munitions, 4.5 tonnes of plastic explosives.
Well, throughout the day, Moscow has been reportedly bombarding the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. Meanwhile, plans to create a humanitarian corridor from the steel plant in the southern port city of Mariupol, where 1,000 people are still sheltering, have so far failed. Casualties are also being reported after 5 railway stations came under fire in the country, including one on the outskirts of Lviv. Ukraine's military command says Russia is attacking train stations to try to halt arms supplies arriving from foreign partners. Here, police have confirmed 4 victims stabbed to death in southeast London were aged in their 30s, 40s and 60s. The 3 women and a man were found with injuries at home in Bermondsey. A man in his 20s has been arrested on suspicion of murder. It's believed that all 5 people knew each other. Chief Superintendent Colin Wingrove described the incident as deeply shocking.
In the early hours of this morning, following a call from neighbours, officers forced entry into a house here in Delaford Road. Inside the house, they made a dreadful discovery of 4 people who had been stabbed. Despite the best efforts of officers and paramedics, all 4 people were sadly pronounced dead at the scene.
The Speaker of the House of Commons has requested a meeting with the editor of the Mail on Sunday newspaper. That comes after they published what some are calling misogynistic claims about Labour's deputy leader. Mail on Sunday reported comments by an unnamed Tory MP that Angela Rayner tried to distract Boris Johnson in the House of Commons by crossing her legs. The Prime Minister says it's unacceptable.
I thought it was a most appalling load of sexist, misogynist tripe, and I immediately got in touch with Angela, and we had a very friendly exchange. And you know, if we ever find who was responsible for it, well, I don't know what we'll do with them, but we'll be the terrors of the earth. But you know, it's totally intolerable, that kind of thing.
Twitter is reportedly close to accepting Elon Musk's $43 billion offer to buy the social media site. The Tesla owner, who's also the world's richest man, has submitted what he calls his best and final offer. Musk says Twitter needs to be taken private and to grow to become a genuine platform for free speech. Boris Johnson says it's very important to have a French president who can be relied upon over the war in Ukraine. That comes after Emmanuel Macron beat his right-wing opponent, Marine Le Pen, in the presidential elections. She previously held close ties with Vladimir Putin. Macron took 58% of the vote to secure a second term in office. That's the first French president to do so in 20 years. Here, the Duchess and Duke of Cambridge have attended a service at Westminster Abbey to commemorate Anzac Day. Earlier, Prince William laid a wreath at the cenotaph to remember the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps personnel who were killed during a battle in Gallipoli during World War I. 130,000 lives were lost. Anzac Day originally commemorated the ill-fated Allied landings, but now honours troops from all conflicts. A manuscript by the novelist Charlotte Brontë will return to her home in Yorkshire after a charity bought it for just under £1 million. The 15-page miniature manuscript, smaller than a playing card, written when the author was just a teenager, will be donated to the Brontë Parsonage Museum in Yorkshire. It's the last of over 24 little books, this one dated December 1829 and containing 10 poems. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Time now for Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that, Polly. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight, my panel. We've got Emily Carver, who's the columnist at Conservative Home, filmmaker Kerry Dingle, and environmental policy researcher Laurie. I always call you Laurie Leybourne Langton. We don't do that anymore, do we? We shorten it.
Got married.
You got married. Laurie Leybourne. Good evening to all of you guys. And you know the drill on Dewbs & Co by now. It's not just about us. It is not. It's about you at home as well and your thoughts. What is on your mind tonight? You can get get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. I was listening to Polly then, by the way, and I can't help but comment on that Twitter story. What do you think to that? Do you use Twitter? Are you a user of Twitter, like I am, that actually thinks it's a terrible place to be? Sometimes I do. So actually, I wasn't going to talk about that story tonight, but you know what? If you can't go off topic on your own show, what can you do? So I will get into that conversation as well a bit later on in the show. Don't forget, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to us on YouTube. We've got an app. We're on the radio. So wherever you are, good evening to you. You are very welcome tonight. Now, Emmanuel Macron has become the first French president to be re-elected in 20 years. The centrist took almost 60% of the vote in the end, 58% compared to Marine Le Pen, who got 42%. Got to be honest, this was a much narrower victory, wasn't it? Then back in 2017, I think Marine Le Pen, I think it's fair to say, she got smashed then, didn't she? But it is indeed her third time where she's failed to be elected. I've got to say, it wasn't really, though, in my view anyway, it wasn't a straight win just for Macron. On Macron alone, I reckon there was a lot of people there that really didn't want Macron, but equally didn't want Le Pen. And I wonder, how is he now going to unite that country? But importantly, Emily Carver, you know, what does this whole kind of re-election of Macron mean for the UK?
Well, I think in general it probably means more of the same. We haven't had the far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen, take the presidency, which was a relief to quite a lot of people in France.
But hang on, do you regard her as far-right? Because, you see, I think in politics, a lot of labels get thrown around to, you know, people say, oh, she is so divisive, while simultaneously providing very divisive labels to the same people. So do you think she was far-right? Is this a rejection of far-right ideals?
Yeah, I think it is unhelpful to just call her far-right. You've seen 42% of people in France, well, of voters. There was, of course, a huge abstention as well. 28% of people didn't even bother turning up for that second round of votes. So that does show that people didn't want to choose between those two candidates. Is she far right? I think she's more of a socialist nationalist, actually. She's very left-leaning on economics, protectionist. She wants to nationalise industries and so on. On the right, her nationalist instincts, you can certainly call right-wing in terms of, you know, bans on cultural symbols, for example, the headscarf, massively reducing immigration into the country. Those sort of proposals can be considered right-wing, but I don't think it's helpful in our political discourse to just dismiss her and all of her support, which is considerable, as being far-right. I'm not sure that helps with the discussion, probably not.
More of the same then, Kerry? Is that what we've got to look forward to?
I'm afraid so, and I think Emily's right. And I think you're right, Michelle. I don't think we can just apply left and right in the old way. I know people who see themselves as very left-wing, who voted for Marine Le Pen because of Macron's attacks on working-class people. I also know people who consider themselves right-wing, who voted for Macron to keep Marine out. You know, I don't think left and right just works in the same old way. And there was also, I think the figures were something like 8% who turned up and voted what's called vote blanc, which is like, you know, nothing. So spoiling the vote, I suppose, in this election. So I think you're right. People were holding their nose on either side of this, and Macron is going to have a very difficult job uniting the country, precisely because his reforms and his failure to deal with the cost of living crisis is quite extreme.
And by the way, you mentioned spoiled ballots. I've run for election in this country, obviously, twice. And I've got to say, one of my most favourite parts of that whole process is you gather around at the counting and you have all your spoiled ballots and you kind of go through them and you make sure that you all agree that they are indeed spoiled. And some of the things, ladies and gentlemen, that you see on those spoiled ballot papers, they are not for innocent eyes like mine. I can tell you what people write and draw on some of those papers. I've no idea if it's the same in France, but it's hilarious when it happens here. Anyway, I digress. Laurie, your thoughts?
I agree with this point about Macron's inability to deal with some of the real pressing problems that people are facing day to day, which are manifesting now in the cost of living crisis. And I think it goes to the point that we've been talking about around how labels are becoming increasingly unuseful. We've seen now for a number of decades a political project that cuts core services and support for people in society, allows particularly very wealthy people to play by a different set of rules. We're kind of experiencing our version of that here in the UK, and then erodes the power of normal people who are in jobs so they have to work for all their income over and over again. And for me, it is no surprise to see a situation in France where more extreme politics, whatever we will label of it, is starting to rise up. And Macron's biggest challenge now is to actually, finally, break from that decades-old political project and make the investments that support everyday people to get rid of the root causes of which the symptom is some more extremist politics that we've seen in the context of this election.
Yeah, go on, Emily.
I would just say that, state planning, expenditure on the public sector is huge in France, bigger than it is here, greater than it is here. Clearly, that level of state control of the economy has not worked. Macron, to his credit, did try to introduce free market reforms into France, and that it's been very difficult for him, protests, etc., against any changes he might want to bring in, any changes to regulation in the labour market, for example. It has been very difficult for a French president to take a completely different stance on the economy than previous presidents may have done so. Marine Le Pen wants to bring it back to more state control of the economy. There are a lot of people who are more free market minded who are very wary of that move from Marine Le Pen and hope that Macron would continue with that. But it looks like he's going to very much crawl back from that stance, that free market stance, and move back towards more high public spending, etc., etc.
And I think, I genuinely agree with the analysis you're making there of what will probably happen. I think that there are some really important ways we should think about the state in the context of the energy crisis that we're facing at the moment. The French energy supply, EDF, is partly state-owned. Macron was talking about taking more of that into state ownership, so he has more control, not less, more control over the ability to make sure he's supporting families in France who are in the same situation as families here. They're having to make choices between heating and eating. So I think we were talking about the breaking down of left and right and so on and so forth. Understanding that the state is a hugely important player in a world racked by crisis, like we saw in the context of COVID, is a really important thing that he's recognising.
I think what France needs is a more vibrant private sector. And France has huge amounts of regulation. It has very high taxes. And I think what France needs is probably economic growth, like we do over here, and they find it rather difficult over there.
Indeed. Let me know your thoughts on that story. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I've got a lot I want to discuss with you. Angela Rayner, the bizarre goings-on at the weekend. Did you see that? I want to talk to you about that. Google, what I would call poking their nose in when it comes to telling you what words you should be using and not. I want to talk to you about coal and whether or not we should be getting more into that to help the steel industry and lots more. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight, my panel, we've got Emily Carver, who's a columnist at Conservative Home, filmmaker Kerry Dingle, and environmental policy researcher Laurie Laybourne. Good evening to you three. I do wish, by the way, sometimes that we could record the goings-on the break, because it does make me smile, some of the conversations. And I also like it when I come back on air and I go, right, we'll have this conversation back on air. It must make my panel go, yeah, OK, Michelle, move on, please. Right, well, the Prime Minister has suggested that he's going to discipline the anonymous Conservative MP who claimed yesterday in the Mail on Sunday newspaper that Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner crossed and uncrossed her legs in Parliament to try and distract Boris Johnson. I mean, how random. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle has asked for a meeting with the editor of the Mail on Sunday to discuss the demeaning complaints, claims. And I tell you, there's been an awful lot of complaints about this. So there has. Kerry Dingle, what do you make to this?
Well, I'll just add to the complainants, because I just think it's incredibly backward. I mean, it's really weird. And why the Mail on Sunday would call this journalism, you know, to be honest, I mean, if some Tory MP really went to the press with this, you just think, you know, who are they? It's a pornographic mindset to suggest that, you know, that's how you deal with a political opponent. And I just think it's remarkably backward. I don't even know if I really believe it. And I think one of the conversations... But what I disagree with Angela on, because she's come out and said, this just goes to show what it's like for women in Parliament. And that also makes me want to say, get a grip. I think good, you know, go for it, debate and rows are, you know, regardless of your sex, are what we'd like to see. So cut all this victim stuff out. But this is, you know, somebody with a pornographic mindset who can't take politics seriously.
Is it, Emily? Is that true? Do you agree? Pornographic mindsets?
I mean, I think you're right that Angela Rayner is no wallflower. I mean, she was very vocal about what she thought about the Tories when she called them Tory scum, which isn't very nice for those who vote Conservative, perhaps, as well as, of course, Tory MPs. But yes, this editorial was absolutely ridiculous. I don't know why they reported on it. But why on earth is the Speaker getting so involved and apparently wants to haul in the editor of the Mail on Sunday? That's absolutely ludicrous. We have a free press in this country. They don't have to reveal their sources. They don't need to go to the Speaker of the Commons. The MPs aren't employees. The Speaker isn't HR. I think that's completely wrong. I think that's not the job of the Speaker to bring in a journalist.
Hold on, Emily Carver, because you're going off script here, because all women are supposed to be mortified by this very suggestion, and we're supposed to be deeply offended and deeply upset by the whole thing. Are you not?
I think it's just because there's always stories like this time and time again, and I do think a lot of it is faux outrage from people who want to make their own political opinions known, and maybe that's a bit unpopular. Obviously, this editorial was bad, this report was bad. What that MP said, if they did say it, was not a nice thing to say, and it's very backward. But I am tired of these identity-type stories about sexism and whatever. I do find it tiring.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I hope that's what people will say to the editor of Mail on Sunday. And I've never seen an article in which someone has remarked about the rippling muscles of the Chancellor or the distractingly handsome features of the... Yeah, well, that's a good point, actually. That is a good point.
Yeah,
but not in the context of
no,
that being
distracting
in a parliamentary setting. And it's not just because the cabinet don't have those features. It's because
well, have you
we're
seen
wanting
it? Well,
to...
actually, no. I was about to be quite rude. Then some of the cabinet, I'll zip my mouth. So you're saying that there's just pure double standards.
Well, it's backward. The reason why we have said on the panel that it's backward is because there has consistently been ways of talking about women in the context of all jobs, and politics is one of them. And it's just, it's bizarre, unfortunate, and I think not really acceptable that it should be that we should have a report like this in a major paper. It doesn't mean that there needs to be some kind of rule where the Mail on Sunday is banned from anything or anything like this. As Kerry was saying, as a journalist, if an MP came to you and said this stuff, you'd just laugh them out of the room or say, oh, OK, sure, we'll bear that in mind. But you would filter it out at that point. We want to encourage more women, particularly from Angela Rayner's background, to go into politics.
And this is not aren't kept out of politics because of, prurient, backward remarks. I mean, those things exist in the real world. And I just don't think that we're that wet or soft, particularly. No. I do think it is prurient, rubbish journalism. I have to say that. Although I think Emily's right. The danger is that people start wanting to clamp down on press freedom, which we don't have a free press, let's be honest. There's an incredible amount of controls on the press already. And it's always this kind of stuff that's used as an excuse.
But what do you think, though? Because we talk about press freedom, which is fair enough, but what do you think about this kind of notion that a newspaper can just print something from a friend, a source, and it's all done anonymously? Because I speak as someone, by the way, that's had incredibly personal information put into tabloid newspapers that I don't believe should ever have been there. And I've actually won a legal case against, in this subject, against a very well-known newspaper, which I shall keep out of it. But I don't think it's appropriate, actually, that a newspaper could just print anything based on anonymous sources.
I think they can... I would support the press printing absolutely anything. It doesn't mean I'd respect that journalism. It doesn't mean I'd think it was great or I particularly want to read it. I think you're right, Michelle, on how pathetic and spineless and cowardly anonymous reporting really is. But I think it's worth remembering that the father of press freedom in Britain, John Wilkes, back in the 17 whatever, his first paper that got banned and he was put in the Tower and London rioted was a dirty poem about the monarchy. I mean, just made up filth, completely made up. And London rioted, for Wilkes and press freedom, because at that time you weren't even allowed to report on the monarchy, never mind write rude stuff. And I think we need more press freedom, not less, and in doing so, challenge these spineless, anonymous idiots.
Well, Glynis, she's watching. She's having none of this. She's saying, Michelle, I don't even believe that any of this has even been said by a Tory. She says, I think it's a made-up story to give the Labour Party something to complain about.
Could be.
Really? Really? Nicholas has said, well, maybe people need to learn how to arrange their clothing. What about distraction press? I'm hastily now going to check myself, my own clothing, make sure there's nothing distracting going on. Don't want any of that, do we? Right, let's talk Google, shall we? What do you think to this story? Again, I found this is my problem. I found too much in society right now, just frankly bizarre. This one is no exception. This is all about Google, the latest in a long line of companies that are trying to almost engineer the way that we speak. And now they're launching an international, it's called basically an inclusive language function. So when you now will type something, I don't know, say landlord, it will come up with a prompt that basically says perhaps you didn't mean landlord. You might want it to be more, inclusive and say property owner or something. Instead of saying chairman, you might want to say chairperson. And what I would be tempted to say back to Google is, well, actually, I might want to think for myself. But am I missing something here, Laurie? Is it the role of a search engine to tell me how I should be more inclusive with my words?
I think it's a feature that can be turned off, and I will not be cowering at my laptop at the idea that Google has introduced that feature. I may turn it off.
But why is it needed?
Well, we should ask Google that, right? I mean, I think
no, they're not here. I'm asking you. Don't ruin my fun.
There's a wider... I would assume that Google would say that there's a wider thing going on here, which is that, certain phrases in society are from past, more backward times when certain groups, like in the case of the word landlord, you're excluding the idea that the owner of property could be a female, for example, and I'm sure that's what they would say. But this is a feature that can be turned off. I don't think we should be that scared of it. I think we should be talking about bigger issues with technology platforms like the news today that Elon Musk could be buying.
Yes, so
Twitter.
we'll come back to that, but hang on a second, because I want to know, Kerry, this whole language thing, because I sit there and think, well, who is offended by, say, like the concept of a landlord? Like, I'm a landlord, I call myself a landlord. I don't get offended because the term doesn't include me, because it should say property owner so that I feel included in the concept.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, you see, I do think it's dangerous, Laurie, because this is kind of nudge in the language sphere. It's trying to nudge our behaviour because we are also apparently and unconsciously sexist, misogynistic, racist, that, you know, if we say housewife instead of stay-at-home spouse, I'd be like, what's one of those? Then obviously we're incredibly backward and our behaviour has to be policed and pushed. And that's what... And Google is, even though at the moment this is going to be rolled out for business and the business corporate world, you know, Google Docs, not just Google search, Google Forms. I mean, it's huge. And Alphabet, that owns Google and YouTube and all these others, are all going in this direction. This is big tech, you know, deciding what we can and can't say, write, read, think, because we can't be trusted. And I think we need to really push back against these people.
And Emily, Kerry's saying there, it's about big tech saying what we can and can't say. You know, to me, it's almost like we're being dictated to what's a good word and what's a bad word. And if you say this word, then you're not a nice person. And if you want to be a nice person, you've got to use this word. And it's that, I guess, that I rail against, whether I can turn it off or not. The principle that is there in the first place, I find bonkers.
Yeah, I hate that element of moral judgment. I don't want Google to have a political or cultural bias. They're providing a service that people use. They have no business telling me whether I'm offended or should be offended by gender-specific language, because it seems to me that it's all about gender-specific language, that I might be horrified if someone wrote policemen instead of police officers. I certainly would not, and I don't think many women would. And it's very sinister, because if you control language, you are almost, or you're on your way to controlling people's thoughts, because if you don't have the language available, then you can't speak to a certain issue or to a certain something that you want to describe. So I think it's very sinister and it is chilling, and I think these tech firms need to be taken down a peg or two, in my view.
Well, speaking of tech firms, Laurie, let's bring it back to the point you wanted to nudge us into. Oh, by the way, we put a poll up on Twitter, you can still take part if you want, asking you, do you think Google should police, basically, the words we should be using? You sensible individuals, you, because only 2% of you said yes. 98% of you so far have said no. But Laurie, in the bulletin earlier on, was talking about Twitter, Elon Musk buying the whole thing. Good idea or not?
Yeah, well, these are the issues that we should be spending more time talking about. Like, we should always be vigilant on what powerful groups in society are doing when it comes to potentially regulating what we say and what we do, right? And I also can understand and in some ways applaud being very vigilant about that and recognising how it could be a slippery slope towards certain things. But in other parts of the tech economy, we have slipped down the slope. When it comes to who owns them, the news today of Elon Musk potentially taking over Twitter, you know, what happens when one person who has very particular views has control over a platform that is currently being used by a lot of people to share their views? We don't know the answer to that. We also have allowed Google and other platforms to have huge penetration into our lives purely based upon profit making. We use them as if they're kind of benign services, like Google Maps, for example, right? They're constantly accumulating our data.
What are they going to do with this language data? If this person has changed it back to policeman too many times, they must be a bigot.
But we need to be talking about the things behind that, you know, determine that power imbalance, like the huge amounts of money these platforms make, the lack of regulation, the lack of taxes they pay. That's the root issue that we need to be dealing with.
It's not the lack of regulation, it's that they work on the regulation with government, so it benefits big corporations, often at the expense parents of the little ones.
No, actually, too many people are looking to big tech to be the regulators. And in fact, interestingly, I find Musk less problematic. He's just, incredibly rich, but he's also very big on free speech. I would never look to him to safeguard free speech, but he's made a big point about that, and I'd say, yeah, we'll see. Because Sunak says something he doesn't like. I do think Laurie's right about we tend to treat them as sort of, benign, hippie, happy, hoppy services, and they're not. They're extremely powerful. But I think it's up to us to not go down the road of more regulation, more interference, and allowing these people to dictate our words.
But we should tax them properly. That's the start, right? Before we even get to regulation, they should be paying their fair share. They shouldn't have the kind of access to lobbying that they clearly have in government.
Well, it's the awful things like Davos and those sort of things where the big corporations, the billionaires who own the big businesses, go and, have backroom meetings with governments and decide the regulation. But it does seem to me that the government is doing all it can to make the internet a less free place when it comes to free speech. And I do think we should be worried about that, safety versus freedom. We don't seem to have the balance right. So I think it's going to be difficult. But that's the online safety bill that's coming our way.
Yeah, and I want to know your views at home, by the way. Are you a Twitter user? Because it is really, very often, it's like a sewer. Yes, I'm sure it has nice elements to it. I'm sure that there are some nice things and people lurking. Maybe I just need to look harder and deeper. But I tell you, that place, personally, I would welcome Elon Musk getting involved and shaking it up a little bit. But what about you? Bernard says, it's easy, Michelle. If you don't like Twitter, just close your account. Well, there you go. I might think about that, actually, after the break. But I've got to say as well, though, Bernard, sometimes I do quite like the arguments with people. I can't resist it sometimes when I see a tweet that I should just ignore. Sometimes I think to myself, no, I'm not having that. So whilst I whinge about it, sometimes I do quite enjoy the sparring as well. Anyway, going to take a quick break. When we come back, Michael Gove is expecting to be considering the building of a new coal mine. What do you reckon to this? Because we are bombarded, aren't we, with net zero, coal is bad. So, is this something that we should even be considering? We'll have that and more after the break. Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, after Prince Harry sends shockwaves throughout the world by voicing concerns for the Queen, threatening to shatter the royal peace process, the father-in-law he's never met, Thomas Markle, gives his first reaction to the runaway Duke's latest bombshell. Plus, Meghan's dad makes a world-exclusive announcement that will rock the Sussexes and the whole of the UK. The unmissable interview with Thomas Markle, coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co. You're very welcome tonight. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock, Emily Carver, who's a columnist at Conservative Home, filmmaker Kerry Dingle, and the environmental policy researcher Laurie Leybourne. And Kerry, you've just been saying you missed the story, the Meghan story. You didn't miss it. It's coming up tonight.
Ah, OK.
So whatever plans you have got, Kerry Dingle, cancel them.
Tune in.
Cancel them.
That's obviously a must.
Watch GB News. You don't even have to watch us. You can listen to us on your radio, so wherever you are, and I'm going to quiz you on it afterwards.
Oh, right, OK.
Make sure you've definitely been paying
take
attention.
Notes.
Yes. Now, the Housing Minister, Michael Gove, is believed to be considering plans to build Britain's first deep coal mine for decades. The colliery, which will be built in Cumbria, will mine this is the worst word, by the way, for my accent, coking coal. Coking coal?
Yeah.
Who invented those words and asked me in a whole accent to read them out? Anyway, this is all about coking coal for the steel industry, so this is not the kind of stuff that you'll be using to heat your homes. By the way, if it's approved, the mine will basically cut the reliance on imported coal for Russia. Now, I have to laugh when I hear that, because most of this stuff is going to be exported. Far be it from me to burst the bubble of the rumours as to why things are happening. But Laurie, your thoughts? You know, you are an environmental campaigner. We're all about net zero. Yeah. Are you in favour of this or not?
So we don't even need to talk about net zero here. We just need to talk about what you just said, which is that over 85% of the coal that we've taken out of this mine, on the admission of the company who would own the mine, will be exported. So it's not even doing what the government is saying it would do, right? This is a quote from the industry body for UK Steel. So as you were saying, the coal is not the coal we would use to heat our homes or put in our power plants. It's coal that's used specifically to help make steel, right? Mm-hmm. And this is the body that represents the steel industry in the UK. The UK steel industry buys its coking coal on the world market, and it will continue to do so. It doesn't rely on one source versus another. So that coal will be taken out and it'll be sold to the highest bidder on the world market. It's the same as, I don't know, the cows in the field next to my house, say. If I go to the supermarket and buy milk, they're not going to be necessarily from the cows next door. The milk is taken out and is sold on a market that stretches across the country, right? So this coal will be exported. It won't make us in any way more energy secure for us making steel anyway, and you don't even need to talk about the environmental element.
So what are you upset about then, Laurie? Are you upset about the principle of doing this, or what some might call a false promise of we're doing this because?
I think it's, in the immediate term, a false promise. It's distracting for people at a time where people are worried about security.
So get rid of that. Are you OK with the principle?
The resources should be spent on other things. You know, we're talking about the promise of jobs in the region. Even if they built it, we've got to get rid of the coking coal being extracted and used in the UK because of things like net zero. So those jobs are probably not going to be there for the longer term. And those jobs should be coming in things like energy efficiency, making sure that we're becoming less reliant on gas and other things that are making us less energy secure now. There are thousands and thousands of high-quality, well-paid jobs in upgrading our homes to make sure we make them warmer and our bills lower. And all the energy and resources, political time and so on should be pumped into that instead.
I think that's disingenuous, Laurie, sorry. You know, even if what you're saying is underneath all this, because I think you wouldn't have a problem if somebody started up a business and half of it was for export. You wouldn't particularly have a problem with it. You have a problem with it because it's fossil fuels. That's what you're making a fuss about. And I don't think this is a problem. It will create 500 jobs. It will pull out coking coal from under the Irish Sea. It was supported by a democratically elected Cumbrian County Council and then pushed aside by a minority of green activists and lobbyists when people in the region wanted it, and they voted for it twice and it's been pushed aside. So I think if this goes through, I hope Gove doesn't bottle it, he probably will, then it'd be a bit of a breakthrough, because I think we should question net zero. We should recognise that all your obsession with renewables and wind turbines, made of steel, by the way, will need coking coal, and you know, wherever it comes from, I haven't got a fixation whether it comes from Britain or elsewhere. I hope they get the cheapest stuff, and the more you produce, it will become cheaper from anywhere. And wouldn't it be great if there were a few other resources we took advantage of that Britain has that actually could impact on energy shortages? But green politics and net zero don't allow for that.
Well, Laurie, before you come back on that, because I suspect you might want to, Emily, I couldn't help but notice your face when Laurie was talking. That did not look like the face of agreement to me. What's going on?
Well, I just think if it's a choice between importing coal and digging it up, mining it up here in this country, where we probably have far higher environmental standards anyway and working conditions than Russia, for example, then it seems to me it's a no-brainer. And don't we have a moral duty to reduce our reliance on Russia for coal and also for gas, which I would argue we should probably be drilling for in this country to add to those exports to reduce Europe's reliance as a whole? You know, we all want to have a greener future. I don't think anyone really disagrees with decarbonisation. Well, some people do, but I think most people want us to be more sustainable into the future, and we know that we can't keep digging coal forever. But this takes time. It's necessary for the transition. You can't turn it off now. People would be freezing and living in the dark.
Laurie, do you want to respond?
The coal is bought on the world market, and so is gas. So it doesn't matter if you extract it here.
Yes, but if we export coal, that is a good thing.
So but you were talking about having a mine here, instead of getting it from Russia, having it here so it stays here because of the standards of jobs and other things. You just argued that we have a mine in the UK, so extract it here, and you inferred that we use it in the UK. It wouldn't.
No, but by contributing to the European market for coal, we are reducing reliance on such regimes such as Russia, which is what all Western governments seem to want to be doing right now, and rightly so.
But you know, the UK, the world market is huge. Like the UK still gets most of its coal from Australia, right? This is not the argument. This is going to make a massive difference. You know, the whole world will suddenly be like, oh my God, thank goodness they built that mine in Cumbria. Suddenly we're all got security when it comes to the coal that we use for making steel. It's just, it's not a credible argument.
We shouldn't just say no to everything just because of a small a bunch of activists who speak the loudest, you know? Otherwise, everything would be cancelled on this basis.
And Laura, you're not objecting to people producing wind turbines and exporting them. You are objecting to digging up fossil fuels per se, are you not?
Well,
so at least be honest about it.
Yeah, of course, for two reasons. One, the steel industry is now using hydrogen and other more advanced technologies to make steel.
And it is so behind in the possibility of using hydrogen now. That's unreal. And a lot of green politics does this. It says, oh, look, we could have a steel industry that's fossil fuel free. You know, we could have everything electrical without any discussion of where that electricity is going to be generated and how. And end up with a politics that makes us poorer, that doesn't do the sums. So hydrogen at the moment is not nearly there and will be really expensive compared with coal, for example. Doesn't do the sums, will make us poorer for some bizarre futuristic enterprise because it thinks that there's so many of us want to destroy the planet when we don't. So I think it's a real non-starter that is going to help people get into ever greater poverty.
The steel industry is very open about how it's investing in modern, more efficient technologies. That's not the case. They're not going to make people poorer. We know that we need to reduce fossil fuels, if not just because it's leading to potentially catastrophic levels of global heating across the world, it's also because of other problems like the health impacts of burning coal and other things. It's also because when we're reliant on fossil fuels like gas, we get pushed into the energy crisis like we're in now. If we were investing in, you don't even need to talk about renewables, energy efficiency in people's homes so they didn't have to pay such high bills and they didn't have to rely on heating their homes with gas, we'd be in a better position now. The government here is talking about how it's going to open one mine in one place, ostensibly for energy security. It's not going to deliver on those stated aims. And it's not, you know, if we're going to pump all that money into making a mine of which the majority of the stuff is exported abroad and goes against our environmental and other goals, that, for me, is something that's making us poorer instead of investments that go into things like energy efficiency.
Well, I'll tell you something else that's making us poorer as we speak, and that is companies taking the absolute Michael with how much they are increasing their prices at the moment. Because, yes, I get it, the cost of certain things are going up, but I don't know about you. In fact, I'm really interested to know what you think about this. The reason I'm asking is because the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, he's asked Ofgem to basically look into what some energy companies are doing. Apparently, they're increasing their prices and providing quite bad service at the same time. So Ofgem will be looking into that. But I'll tell you what I want to look into on Dewbs & Co, and I'll come back to the Ofgem thing in a minute. I think it's much broader than just energy companies. I think there are so many companies right now that are really inflating their prices beyond what they should. And I get it. A lot of companies have been forced to close. They've made perhaps losses or reduced profits previously. But is it responsible right now to be increasing profits the way that many people are? And I'm asking this, by the way, as a capitalist. I don't mind a bit of profit. But these are really unprecedented times, aren't they? And I worry for an awful lot of people. So I'm asking you at home tonight, have you got examples of where, I don't know if it's your mobile phone company or your local supermarket or whatever, your pub, your restaurant near where you live, where you're seeing huge price rises that are way beyond the levels of inflation and things like that? Get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Let me know, at Michelle Dewbs on Twitter. Very briefly, just on this point about energy companies overinflating their prices, do you agree with that, Emily?
I think they certainly are. I think this may be a result of government policy, though, rather than necessarily those corporates being particularly greedy, although they may well be. The problem is that we've had 27 suppliers of energy go bust, and that was due to the government's ill-thought-through energy price cap, which, of course, they've had to raise because they can't control wholesale prices of energy. So many suppliers have gone bust. That means there isn't as much competition as there used to be. We used to have all these small companies coming in and offering you cheaper prices and offering you all these different, schemes and programs you could go on with your energy bills and so on. But we just don't have that at the moment. It's going back to, a few companies being in charge of the market, and that's not good for competition and it's not good for prices.
Carrie?
I think that's probably true, but I think Michelle is right that there is across the board opportunism in terms of profiteering. And I know just in terms of, for the charity I run, the energy bill, after I'd signed up for the charity for a new contract, which is horrendous, the increase is 4,000 to 10,000 per annum, so we're going to switch our gas off. They turned around to me and said, oh, and that, by the way, there's no cooling off period. We've abolished the cooling off period.
What,
and I'm
14 days?
Yeah, I'm like, hang on a minute, I don't think you can abolish legally a cooling off period. So I think there's some really dodgy things going on. And not only that, the endless calls you now get. I'm now getting endless calls because I went to a compare site. Endless calls wanting to sign me up for this and sign me up for that. And I'm just like, block it, block it, block it. Don't sign up for anything. Make sure you find another way to find out, what the decent prices are, because there's some real racketeering going on, in my view.
Let me know what you think at home, because I am really interested in this, because I know I've got examples, but I want yours as well. I might do this tomorrow or the day after, we'll see. But I think it's a really important topic to get into. But Laurie, on this energy one specifically, your thoughts?
I mean, these companies have got previous on this. No matter the level of competition that we've had, energy suppliers have consistently taken advantage of customers, particularly who are of older generations, various ways of pricing things and having people extending their bill periods without necessarily knowing about it and so on. This has been happening for years and years and years. And this is just another blatant example in a long line of examples of where these companies have exploited people across the UK. And it really is grim in normal times that it's happening now as the cost of living goes up and as we head towards a winter that's going to be even worse than we experienced last winter. It's just completely unacceptable. And it further hammers home the need for us to look at this energy market and recognise that things like competition in the past haven't answered all our questions. It doesn't mean we need to lurch in an opposite direction or anything, but we have to admit that these companies have been on the make for a long time.
Well, Mike says, Michelle, on this whole price thing, a free market should allow consumers to move away from high prices, and that will keep all prices competitive. The problem that you've got now, there is very little choice because pretty much everything is all going up and up and up. You're absolutely right. On the whole language conversation that we were having earlier on, I was asking you, do you agree with Google, for example, trying to alter the language that you're using? So say, for example, if you typed in landlord, it might come up with, say, property owner instead, etc., etc. Lots of feedback on that, I can tell you. Lots of you saying the alternate to landlord, Michelle, is landlady. Well, I don't know. I'm not Google. I'm not the one that's coming up with the alternate word. You certainly don't want me coming up with alternate words. I can tell you get yourself into trouble. Richard says, all of this is straight out of Orwell's 1984. Dawn says, I personally like the same English language that I was taught 50 years ago. She says, the lady is not for turning. And I think you're actually right there, Dawn. I think there are so many different examples now of words that we all used to just know what they meant, suddenly been up for grabs. What is the meaning of various words? Sometimes I think if someone had been in a coma or something for 10 years, woken up today to listen to the basic words now being questioned. What does this mean? What does that mean? What is a woman? What is this? I think they'd be incredibly confused, some people, so they would. That is the sentiment that's coming through loud and clear on the email. I don't really think anyone so far has emailed in saying that you do agree with it, you do want Google to kind of suggest different words to you. If you do want that, tell me, let me know what you think. Lots of conversation around the French election. Again, the sentiment coming through there from the viewers is that you very much agree with what you've just been hearing, which is not necessarily this is in favour of Macron, but more against Le Pen. I found that quite interesting, and I've got to say, not my views, the views of many viewers. Many people are writing in saying that they're just not sure about the source of this comment. Is it a suggested ploy by Labour to try and smack the Conservatives once more, but today on a different topic? What do you think to that? Is this made up?
The Mail on Sunday is part of the Mail on Sunday is part of Labour's grand strategy to get elected. I'm not quite sure about that.
I don't know.
It could be, but it's hard to know, isn't it? It's just such a load of rubbish, though, in general. Do you know what I mean? It's just so backward.
Linda says, why doesn't the Commons have a dress code, i.e. skirts no shorter than your knee, and an alternative trousers?
I think it does have a dress code, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean... Really?
Some of them do look a state in the House of Commons, though.
But isn't it just professional standards? Because I have to say, I just think if you're going to do something professional, like I've put a dress on today and I look at myself and I think that's quite low, actually. So then I put a vest on, just so it's a bit more professional.
Your viewers will be gutted.
The Cabinet will be absolutely horrified.
They'll be very distracted now, Michelle.
You can't see anyway, look, because we've got that big name strap there that covers the crucial part. It's like a modesty.
Oh, it does actually.
It does, look at that. If you're watching the screen right now,
if you're distracted...
Sorry, the Cabinet.
Yeah, it's a modesty strap. If you're not watching the screen and you're listening on the radio, if you're in your car or something, you're going, what's she talking about? What I'm talking about is we've got a big strap that happens to say, as we speak, get in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk. That's what's going on now. So whatever was underneath my dress, quite frankly, you wouldn't be able to see. So modesty, I think, is the way forward in a professional environment anyway. Right, that's pretty much all we've got time for. Nigel Farage will be coming up at the top of the hour. He'll be live from Westminster. What a treat for you there. Good evening, Nigel. Good evening. Can you hear me? There he is, Nigel Farage.
I certainly can, Michelle.
He's coming up. What have you got coming up very quickly, Nigel?
Cost of living, can people afford to pay their bills, energy prices, and Daniela Westbrook on Talking Pints.
Well, there you go. Do not switch off. 7 o'clock, Nigel Farage coming up tomorrow with me, by the way. My panel, David Starkey, Benedict Spence and Polly Mackenzie will be joining me to go through the stories that have got you talking. Have yourself a fantastic night, and I'll see you the same time tomorrow.
Good evening. Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Pretty chilly tonight, so a fresh start tomorrow. Many of us having a dry day and some places having a sunny day, but others will be quite cloudy. High pressure is in control of our weather, but it's sitting up to the north, and around it the winds are coming down from the north. Hence why it is going to be pretty chilly overnight. Not too strong the winds though, and as we have clear skies for the majority, that will allow those temperatures to tumble. We will see increasing cloud over northern Scotland, a few showers here and there across the far northeast, but for most it will be a dry night. Temperatures, as I said, will be falling away. 3 or 4, that's towns and cities. Rural spots not far off freezing, with some places dipping a touch below. So a cool start to Tuesday, but for many, a dry and a bright start. Quite a bit of sunshine around. Quite cloudy over eastern Scotland. That cloud will spread through central Scotland, northeast England, with a few showers likely here in the morning. That cloud thickening as